Morning, Sean. Welcome. Thank you very much for the intro and getting up early in the morning to make sure that we all on track. To everybody that is in the room today, just want to wish you good morning. Welcome. Thank you very much for taking the time out to just go through today's Tech Talk. What I've done with today's Tech Talk is basically to try and tie it in with the webinars that we've been having in the evenings, which on Monday night we had the compliance certificate, Tuesday the non-compliance certificate. Obviously, last night we ended up doing the audit, the processes of the audit. And one of the things that have come up is meeting compliance, high-rise buildings, factories, shopping centers, etc., etc. So some of the questions that come through. So basically, today's presentation, I just want to go through a couple of examples, what you can, what you can't do, and how we address it. It does become a problem in terms of the plumber, the auditor, and the consumer in terms of trying to meet compliance within high-rise buildings. So there is quite a bit in terms of the presentation, so I'm going to just jump in. And for those guys that have heard it before, you're going to learn something again. For those that haven't, well, let's get locked and loaded. Thank you. So again, we look at this and it talks about definitions and SAN standards and everything else. And I think the very key thing for us is to make sure that we have rational designs in the General Assembly. So again, we have this word that gets bandied around, it's deemed to satisfy, etc., etc. So again, if you're going to have a look at the rational designs and what SAN states very clearly is that it has to meet the minimum requirements. It cannot be less, it has to meet. So again, in terms of those designs, we need to ensure it cannot be below that standard. It has to meet that standard in terms of where it is. So again, when we have these installations that are done and they say, oh, it's deemed to satisfy, you need to go back to what the SAN's definitions are in terms of what that deemed to satisfy is. And it cannot be less than what the minimum requirements are. Carrying out replacements, plumbing installations within commercial, industrial, high-rise buildings have challenges in terms of meeting the requirements of the applicable standard. I was at a shopping center the other day. The one tenant's moved out, the next tenant's moving in, and their obviously requirements were different to those that were there before. And then you have the plumber who goes in and tries to do an installation. And in some cases, it's actually virtually impossible to do it or to meet those requirements. So we're just going to have a look at and see a couple of examples and what can be done and what needs to be done in terms of safety. Questions are always asked, what do I do in these situations? For me, the worst thing is to do nothing. And you'll be surprised how many times the auditors will go out, or you've gone out to a site yourself and you've actually seen that somebody's removed the hot water cylinder, for example, put another one back, call it like for like, whatever the case may be, and it is totally non-compliant. It's a safety risk, and it puts both person and property at risk. And, you know, when you sometimes talk to the contractor, he says, well, what could I have done? And again, what I said is the worst thing to do is nothing. Residential properties have unique challenges where there are no allowances being made for trays, expansion relief pipes, or temperature pressure discharge pipes. In some cases, these buildings are not designed for high pressure geyser installations. We have geysers and cupboards and service ducts, walkways. I once had a meeting with somebody at the insurance sector, and they said, well, where are geysers actually installed? And my reply was in the most inappropriate places, because I think we all can testify to that. Wherever you can squeeze a geyser in, under a cupboard, in a duct, whatever, accessibility is just one of those last things that actual designers look at. So this is one that we saw where you'll see this picture. There's this industrial pot sink. Again, same typical amendments and changes to a shop, and they now require hot water where there was no hot water before. And here we have the plumber who's had a look at it. The geysers up in the roof, but there's nowhere to discharge the pipework. So he's thought outside the box, and he's decided that he'll bring these down into a pot sink. So we'll agree that he's tried to do something in terms of mitigating risk. But in actual fact, what he's actually done is created more of a risk in terms of anybody that would be working around that pot sink, etc. So looking at it from a broader perspective, directly below that pot sink is a floor drain. So had he brought the TP down to discharge in the corner, it's graded down to the floor drain, then this installation would have been safer. So again, sometimes when we even do or try and do the right thing, it's not quite where it should be in terms of safety. And safety is the key critical one. I think in terms of compliance, if you can't get it compliance, then start looking at how do you make it safe. If you take another one that we have here, and I'm sure you guys will have seen hundreds of these, but basically, again, in terms of a shopping center where there's actually nowhere to position that geyser, we now have it up to the plumber, who now says, I can make a plan, and he does this type of thing to install a geyser. So if we look at this thing in terms of accessibility, in terms of warranties, etc., there's a multitude of sins that are here that the plumber's actually created and taken responsibility for when he's done this type of installation. One that comes up all too often, and the guys have seen it, in terms of the Prisma geysers, we seem to find that they become the go-to product in terms of installation for sinks, basins, etc., where they're requiring hot water. But again, as we've heard on so many of these tech talks, these units are push-through systems. They are not pressurized systems. But again, we continuously find plumbers that will pressurize that unit and install the incorrect mixer. So again, it's just like a geyser. It has to have the TP valve. It has to have this, and this Prisma, or those units that are point of use have to have the correct mixers installed. The argument always comes through in terms of the client saying, well, they don't want that type of mixer or whatever. But you as the plumber, you need to be responsible. You need to advise them of the risks that they have, etc., etc. So again, don't be part of the problem. Be a part of the solution. In terms of these, for guys that do residential and high-rise, again, the same principle applies here. In some cases, we've got old combinations or push-through geysers where the requirement now is to put a pressure cylinder in. And yeah, the plumber makes a plan. And this is the type of plan that you have when the guys are restricted with space, or there is no allowance for expansion, reliefs, or discharges, etc., etc. So just looking at this installation, you can see very clearly in terms of trays, outlets from the trays, there's no protection for safety in terms of the pipework. If you look at the safety, we've got braided connectors, we've got a mixed drum. And these are the type of things that we may look at them and laugh, but these are real installations that are done. Another one where the oak's trying to make a plan. If you can make head or tail of where we are in terms of this, again, individuals that are trying to provide or do installations, and they become totally non-compliant in all aspects. Here we have the same type of thing where, again, space and restriction of space becomes a problem. So therefore, the plumber does what he thinks is going to be right. But let's just have a look at these TPs and the way the installations are done, etc., etc. These are walkways below it. People are walking there, and the discharge from the TP is not even connected. There's not even a plan being made in order to try and make it safe. And on each of these installations that you'll see, the question's always been asked of the plumber, and he will be saying, what else could I have done? Here you'll see, again, where we have restrictions of space, where plumbers have adapted geyser brackets or put hot water cylinders and service ducts to basically try and meet the requirements for the consumer. But again, they're putting themselves at risk in terms of how they've adapted these, and how the pipework has been done. Here's a prime example. In this installation, you can see how it's been mounted. It is a horrendous installation, but it's a reality. So it's above a kitchen nook, it's about everything else, and how do you make this thing comply? And these are the things that what we find, and I was talking to Marius down in the South Cape the other day, and I think for us, these are all buildings that have been created, they've been put there, and it goes back to right at the beginning. You know, when we get the plans and where we get the drawings in terms of these positioning of these systems, we need to start asking the question from the ground roots. We need to start asking the question, what about the allowance for the TP? What about the allowance for the expansion relief? What about the tray? If you look at this installation here, how do you make that comply? It's virtually impossible to do it. And it all goes back to the planning stage. It all goes back to, in many cases, the plumber, us, not asking the right questions, or basically substantiating evidence that we've actually raised this to the developer or the builder or whatever the case may be. And the risk factor that comes into this is basically, if a certificate of compliance is issued where it should be in terms of this installation, it's certainly going to fail because of the lack of information or whatever. So please just don't put yourself at risk when it comes to this type of installation. Ask the right questions, get the correct details, and if you have your concerns, then certainly go to your IOPSA region, speak to the chairman or the technical guy, and get that assistance. Just don't put yourself at risk when it comes to this type of installation. Again, just as you think that you've seen everything, you end up with this type of installation. So, you know, not only is it non-compliant, but, you know, again, we've taken away from the warranty. The warranty is not there. Your service agents are not going to go out and carry out any replacement on this installation. And again, why should we as the plumbers be put in this point, and why should the consumer be put in this position when totally non-compliance prevails? Excuse me. Again, a typical installation that's up in a roof space of a shopping center where the plumber's tried to do the best that he can, and this is what you end up with. You know, discharges from the trays going into sewer stacks, incorrect lagging, no support, everything else. So, as we said yesterday, sometimes with these geysers, they're out of sight, they're out of mind. We talked yesterday with regards to the consumer. And, you know, inevitably, when you ask the consumer, what does a geyser look like, they really couldn't tell you. They open up their taps and they get hot water, and that's sufficient for them. They're not aware of this non-compliance. And for us, the plumber, we need to protect ourselves. All too often, we find plumbers at risk. And at the end of the day, when the audit comes through and it fails, then the plumber is the one that's the meat in the sandwich. So, guys, when you get to installations like this where you've got to make that plan, safety is the key thing, and ensure that you covered yourself. In this particular installation, same principle applies, where you've got a tundish that the guys have created to try and alleviate the expansion and the relief, but you end up with, if the TP goes, so will that PVC. Old installation, it's been like that for a while, and you'll more likely find units have been changed often enough. But when I spoke to the managing agent in terms of this and showed them where the non-compliances were, what they were amazed at is that none of the other plumbers that had conducted or carried out these installations had actually brought it to their attention. And they were asking the question, how do we rectify, what do we do to make these things compliant? So again, these are opportunities for you, the professional plumber, to be able to affect your bottom line, to be able to be that professional, bring it to their attention, provide a costing in order to rectify, and show them the safety issues and create that awareness. This one again, and you can see this through all of these photos that I'm showing you, and these are real installations where guys have tried to make a plan. Let's not be in a position where the oaks have tried to make a plan, but there's trying to make a plan and trying to make things safe. And this type of installation, it's like a Meccano set, and you can see the individuals try, but he just doesn't understand the question when it comes to compliance or even trying to make it safe, because you are going to destroy that pipework if one of the TP valves goes. This was an installation for, I think there was 2 units per floor, and there was 9 to 10 floors. And yes, they thought about it. So basically what they have done in terms of this installation, quite a big block of flats, and they'd interconnected all of the expansion reliefs from both geysers into one particular discharge pipe, the TPs into it. All the overflows from the systems were connected to this, and it was lovely. They brought it down to the garage. It discharged on the garage floor, which obviously now, if you look at the standard, says that these must discharge in a position where they can't cause damage to personal property. So now what's the next thing? Let's put a bucket under it. So they actually have an individual that goes around every day and empties out all of the water into from these buckets. And the challenge for the plumber, as you guys will all know, so when you get down there and it starts and you've got all this water in here, you've now got to go up 9 floors. All these geysers are centralized within the block of flats, behind panels and ducts, and in order to determine which system's overflowing or which geysers overflowing or whatever, you've actually, it's the type of job possibly the plumbers would love to have, because from a 1-hour job you could spend all day there. But again, it doesn't go back to meeting the standards in terms of requirements of safety, accessibility, etc. So these are all sort of photos that I've shown you that where the plumber's tried to make a plan. He's tried to make it as safe as he can, but sometimes when we do that, we create more problems for ourselves than what we had previously. So just make sure. And if you're not sure, again, go back to the technical guys from IOPSA or speak to your local compliance auditor and get some info in terms of that. So as one can see, trying to comply with the standard is somewhat difficult, and in many cases, decisions made will result in the plumber being held responsible for a non-compliant installation. So I think I'm going to end it up there, Sean. I think if we got some time there, I think we got our 10 minutes for questions, but I think in terms of where we are, this is just to show you that in terms of how we deal with this, it's quite simple. Safety is a non-negotiable. We need to ensure that wherever possible, there's no damage to persons or property, and that's vital. So I think, as I said in my last one, the worst thing that you can do is nothing. So make sure that your non-compliance notice covers it. Make sure that you bring it to the attention of the owner, the user, in writing, in plain language, as per the SANS specifications. Sean, are we okay to go back to you?
Absolutely perfect. We'll go straight into the questions because we have got a couple. The first one reads, what do we do if it is in a bathroom above the bath and cannot put in a tray?
Okay, so depending on where you go and how it is. So it says there clearly if the geyser is positioned if the geyser is installed in a position where it can cause damage. So I know in KZN and various other places, they would consider that bath to be almost as a tray. Okay, so that in the event that it leaks, we've got to remember that geysers don't burst, they leak. So therefore it would leak into the bath. The biggest problem that you have with that is obviously expansion reliefs, and our major one being the TP. So again, based on the installation where it is, in certain circumstances, you can't get that TP down and out because obviously be coming through at head height. So you need to have a look at that installation, see which is the best way possible in terms of making it safe. Don't bring it down next to the bath with a 45 or a 90 and it looks like a gun barrel at the end of the bath or above the bath. We're looking at safety, we're looking at discharge. Some individuals will bring that expansion relief down to the actual bath itself, let it hang over the edge, and eventually what actually happens is you start staining it. So it's always to go and look for that alternative where you can install it. So each installation will be slightly different. but it's just to try and find that solution. The other problem that you have is the body corporates that are not too happy about holes through walls with new pressure systems or whatever the case may be. So that also does create challenges. So in essence, I think the biggest thing, look at each one in its own right and try and find the easiest and the safest solution to making that installation safe.
All right, the next question here reads, with the Prisma under-counter geysers, the manufacturer stated that the PRV valve can be installed to accommodate a different mixer instead of the recommended mixer. The PRV will release the excess pressure and heat build-up. Is that correct?
Okay, so we've had this one on numerous occasions, and I think it's been debated and pointed through. Let's be very clear in terms of what the SAN standards require. The SAN standards, if it's tested in terms of a push-through geyser, that push-through geyser comes with its own mixer, and that's what the SAN's requirements request and require. So again, we've had this debate of where the manufacturers say A and the manufacturers say B. If you go back to the manufacturer and they give it to you in writing in terms of that, then they take that responsibility. But the SAN standards are very clear in terms of that push-through geyser. It's non-rated in terms of pressure. It cannot be converted into a pressure cylinder. There are various webinars on that, and I think it's been a debatable point. But again, for us being the responsible plumber, we have to install it as per the SAN's requirements.
Right, the next question reads, cupboard geyser replacement. If there is a burst geyser already in there and all the plumbing is in the wall, how do you go about replacing that geyser? Space for a tray, but TP and PRV has to go into a duct. What would you advise?
So again, we go back to that same principle of each installation is going to have its own challenges. Okay, so if we go and have a look at some of the service ducts and the buildings that I've been involved with and seen, the conversion of old, let's say, for example, there was an old combination geyser that was installed there. So obviously there would only be one outlet being for the overflow from the tank of the combination geyser or push-through geyser that they had there. So you've got one discharge pipe. So guys, I'm not telling you to do this, okay? But we're looking at items of safety. So what I've actually done personally is actually interconnected the two. The standards state very clearly that you cannot interconnect both the TP and the expansion relief valve. They have to go out independently. But again, what I've done is first and foremost look at where those pipes, or the one pipe is actually being discharged. If it's onto a passage and it's at head height and everything else, again, you have to go back and have a look at it and say, okay, if the TP discharged through that pipe and somebody's walking past it, then obviously you haven't made it safe. You possibly make it unsafer than it was before. So it's going to have a look at each installation on its own merit. Bring them out into the service ducts. Again, we go back to issues in terms of height. So if you were 3 meters up and the standard says 3 bends, 4 meters, need to increase it to 28. It's something in terms of discussing with the body corporate, if they are going that type of route, is to possibly start installing a common line where you could actually have your tongue dish and be able to see it through the service duct, or be able to identify where that's leaking. But again, each and every one of them is going to be different in terms of the design of the bathroom, where it is. I've seen some plumbers that have connected a trap, for example, and they've taken the expansion relief into a trap that they've cut in, so that the expansion relief can drip into that. That certainly can work and does work. But if it's a holiday flat, for example, and you get evaporation in terms of the water, then you have a dry trap, and then you start basically have a smell coming into the unit. So it's always sometimes better to put it where it can be primed. And then we have others that have, taken the lesser of two evils and connected them directly into a sewer stack, drilled a hole, heated up a hole, put the pipe in there. But again, if you go back to what that standard says very clearly, must discharge in a position where it can be seen, safe, everything else. And with water conservation and water being a big issue, in the event of that expansion relief with the valve basically failing and overflowing, then you're going to add to the woes in terms of water. So again, have a look at each installation in its own merit and look at what's going to be the safest and the best option.
All right, the next question reads, would it be beneficial for an architect to be aware of our SANS code of conduct so they can design a building effectively? Sometimes the architect can turn a deaf ear to subcontractors on site and get a shock later to receive a letter of responsibility from the plumber to the architect.
100%. I think that's a really great question that's come through. So whoever brought that question, well done. I think that's where I said right off the bat when I first kicked off, is by saying that all too often at the end of the installation and the audits being conducted or being completed, all of these non-compliance issues come to the fore. So the best way in which to plan this is obviously the first day that you're on site, or you've got your working drawings or whatever the case may be, your first site meeting, whatever it is that you're doing. The key thing is to start addressing these things right from the front. Okay, so if I take Durban, for example, they very much in terms of external overflows from systems, etc. So if you were a contractor from Joburg and you priced this job in Durban and you arrived here and the wet services guys, at the end of the project came there and there was no overflows from systems or whatever, and they weren't external, then you would end up chopping up buildings. And trust me, that has happened. So yes, the professional team are professionals, but just remember, guys, we are the professional plumbers. And I think for us, there's enough information out there for us to be able to substantiate a non-compliance, to be able to go to an architect or an engineer or a designer and say, hey guys, here's the proof, there's where it is, this is what I have to do as a responsible and licensed plumber, and in order to provide you with a certificate of compliance at the end of the job. So we need to amend and change. So not all architects are aware of it. It's something that IOPSA and PIRB are working on to address this. It's been a big point for us to be able to help out. But again, as I've said, if you're in an area and you are exposed to that, then please go to your local chairman or your compliance audit that you have there for assistance, and we will, from an IOPSA point of view, is provide you with that info and guidance.
Right, I think we have got time for one more question. The next question reads, in a situation where the discharge pipe cannot be run to the outside of the building, what type of tundish is acceptable?
Okay, so again, depending on what it is that we're taking into it. So if it's expansion relief that's going in, you can create your own tundish with PVC pipe. In terms of with a reducer, for example, as you saw in the one. Okay, and normally what would happen is it would actually not discharge directly into that tundish. It would be about 20 mils above, so that if you opened up the service duct, you wouldn't have to go and peer inside and go and get a ladder to look. It would discharge just directly above that so that you could actually see it. However, when you get to a TP discharge, that's a different story altogether. So bearing in mind the temperature of the water that's going to be coming out of there is going to be superheated water, and therefore any PVC in that vicinity, it will destroy not only the tundish, it'll actually destroy the PVC pipe or the discharge pipe. There was one in Belito where all the horizontal piping that was in the false ceiling was destroyed because of the safety valve that comes from there. So alternately, if you were up in the reef or whatever, you could go to a metallic pipe and it would form and do a dual purpose in terms of actually taking the TP as a common line based on this upsizing of it, and then also in terms of the tundish for the expansion relief. So that type of scenario would be in order.
All right, well, guys, it has gone off past, so I am going to go ahead and have to end off the session. Those answers or those questions that we weren't able to get to, we'll get back to you via email, guys. As far as this morning's session goes, guys, thanks so much for joining us. I do think it was a productive session. Thank you, Steve, for taking the time out to prepare the session
Pleasure.
for us. And then, guys, please remember the survey on the way out. Thanks so much for joining us again, guys, and enjoy the rest of your week. Bye, guys.
Take care and have a great day. Cheers, Abe. Bye.